name is Brian Schreiner, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Dean of the FIU, Florida International University, College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts, home to the Lillian Lodge Copenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication. On behalf of our FIU President, Dr. Jessel, and my colleagues at FIU, I want to welcome and thank you for participating in this important conversation this afternoon, Women in Communication, the Future is Female. Let me start by stating the obvious. Leadership really makes a difference. And when it's absent, it's even more clear to us that it makes a difference. And we feel the impacts in our professional and in our personal lives. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I believe, said it best when she said, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." This morning, we are blessed to be joined by an amazing panel of professionals and thought leaders, women who excel in their fields, and are perfect examples of what Justice Ginsburg urged us to do, lead by example. But before we begin this morning's conversations, I want to take a moment to recognize and introduce to you a friend and colleague, Dr. Lillian Lodge Copenhaver, Dean Emeritus of FIU and Director of the Copenhaver Center. Dr. Copenhaver has been an exemplary leader and tireless national advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion her entire life, setting an example, opening doors, creating opportunities, and paving the way for past, present, and future generations of professionals and scholars. Since its inception in 2012, the Copenhaver Center, which in addition to being at FIU is now also located on several campuses across the country, and I know many of those, I believe there's 3, are joining us today. The Copenhaver Center has been offering leadership training, mentorship programs, and publishing illuminating gender equity research studies, all driven by the center's and Dr. Copenhaver's personal mission to empower success and diversify leadership. Dr. Copenhaver is someone who you might say knows the way, shows the way, and goes the way. Like our panelists, she personifies the wise words of Justice Ginsburg. Dr. Copenhaver does it in a way that will lead others to join. And that's why we're all here this afternoon. Everyone, please join me in thanking and welcoming Dr. Lillian Lodge Copenhaver.
Thank you, Dean Schreiner, for those lovely words. It is my pleasure to also welcome you to the 6th National Conference of the Copenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication. The Future is Female. We have an exciting and enlightening program planned for you this afternoon. I know you are aware that women make up more than half the population of the United States. It is therefore very important that communications in this country represent our population equitably, both in the information that is delivered and in those who deliver that information. We have an awesome group of speakers with us today who will share their thoughts and advice about the theme of our conference and how the next generation of communicators can succeed and be heard. The mission of the Copenhaver Center is to empower both women professionals and academics in all of the fields of communication in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their communities and in their professions. Our conference today will provide us with an opportunity to take a look at the future of communications and explore opportunities for women to realize their potential and become those visionaries and leaders of tomorrow. We will begin with our keynote speaker in the first hour, and that will be followed by our Thought Leaders Forum in the second hour. All our speakers will take questions, and we ask you to put your questions in the chat. We will wrap up at 3 o'clock. I want to give a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us from our satellite centers for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Rowan University, Stevens College, and Marymount University. Joining us today as convener is Mindy Marquez. Marquez joined Simon & Schuster Publishers in 2020 as vice president and executive editor after a 30-year career as a journalist. Prior to book publishing, Marquez was publisher and executive editor of the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald, and Florida regional editor for McClatchy. During her tenure, the Miami Herald received 2 Pulitzer Prizes and was a finalist 4 different times. Award-winning work included the in-depth series that revealed widespread abuses in Florida's juvenile justice system and the nationally acclaimed investigation into millionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and his cohorts. Marquez received the Benjamin C. Bradley Editor of the Year Award in 2019 and is a former co-chair of the Pulitzer Prize Board. We are also proud to have her serve as a member of the Leadership Council of the Copenhaver Center. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. Sally Busby is executive editor of the Washington Post and the first woman to lead the newsroom in the organization's 144-year history. All the more reason for her to headline our conference today, Women in Communication, the Future is Female. Since joining the Washington Post in June of 2021, she has made significant changes to newsroom leadership, including naming the Post's first senior managing editor, appointing a chief product officer and managing editor, and creating 3 new deputy managing editor roles. She has also added 41 editor positions to support a growing 24/7 news operation at the Post. Our keynote speaker previously served as executive editor and senior vice president of the Associated Press. Based in New York, she oversaw the AP's global coverage in text, phone, video, and digital interactives from AP journalists based in more than 260 locations worldwide. Prior to that, she served as Washington bureau chief for 6 years, where she led AP's coverage of the 2016 presidential campaign and election of Donald Trump and the 2012 election, including oversight of polling and investigative units, as well as coverage of the White House, Congress, and the Pentagon. Busby joined the Associated Press in 1988 as a reporter in Kansas, and also worked as a reporter in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Washington. In 1996, she became assistant bureau chief for news in Washington, where she ran spot news coverage and oversaw in-depth foreign affairs and national security coverage. For 5 years, beginning in 2004, she served as AP's Middle East regional editor, based in Cairo. In that position, she led news coverage during the Iraq War and other regional conflicts and managed the staff, budgets, and security for AP's Middle East region. It is my pleasure to present Sally Busby. Sally?
Thank you so much, Lillian, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'm really glad to be here with all of you this afternoon, and so glad, especially to talk to young women. I think that's such a critical part of what I feel my responsibility is at this time, and I think that all of us do. So I wanted to talk about a few personal things at the start and professional things, and then we are obviously going to take your questions on any issues you want to discuss, which I think in a conference like this is perhaps the most valuable part. When I was named as the first woman executive editor of the Washington Post a little more than a year ago, I was, in honesty, somewhat skeptical of how important the first woman part of that was. I was the second woman editor of the Associated Press, and they're now on their third. And so I was perhaps, in some ways, underplaying the importance in reality. But when I joined the Post and when I started to talk to people, I would say both men and women at the Post, I did actually realize how revelatory it was. I realized how important it was. I realized that it truly mattered to people. It was, in some ways, very overdue. It made me somewhat sad that we are still at the point where it was so important to all the people in that newsroom. But it also gave me just a sense of, it gave me a feeling of a sense of responsibility and of how things like diversity and leadership are part of a spectrum. And I wanted to sort of talk today about where I think we are on that spectrum a little bit. So I would say in my day-to-day work life, I have found, somewhat to my surprise, that it does matter more than I had thought it would. I was recently in a story meeting about a very sensitive story. It happened to be about abortion that we were working on. In this case, the reporter was a woman, and I, the executive editor, am a woman. And in this case, we were the only two women in the room as we talked about this very sensitive story. It was a group of about 6 people, 4 men, high-ranking editors in our newsroom, myself and the reporter. And I realized how tough it would have been if I had not been there. And if that reporter, who's doing very, very strong and sensitive work and very, very scary work in some ways, if I had not been there in that room, if there had not been a high-ranking editor in that room who was a woman, I think that conversation would have been more difficult. And every minute that I think about situations like that, I realize over and over again how important diversity, how important representation of different backgrounds, of different demographics are when we are trying to do thoughtful intellectual work on any topic. So that has done several things for me. It's made me even more grateful for the pioneers who very, very much opened the doors that I'm now walking through. And I'm very keenly aware of that. I have 2 daughters in their 20s, and they know the world as it is now. But when I started at the Associated Press in Washington, I worked with women who had actually been the first women in that newsroom, been in that newsroom when there were 45 men and 2 women. And they were working, they were really, really pushing the envelope. They were really pushing into that place. They were truly pioneers, and they opened those doors for me. And I want to always keep that in mind. I think it is incredibly important for all of us to understand the things that have to happen legally on a personal level to allow the places that we are now in our careers. There were lawsuits in the early 70s. And if I ever write a book, that might be what I write it about. But there were a series of women who actually filed lawsuits against news organizations, including some that I've worked at, to actually open up jobs. And I think it's so critically important that we always remember that this is not necessarily a natural evolution, that it always takes work and it always takes concerted work. The second thing I think it has made me realize is also how far we have to go, not just in terms of women in leadership, gender diversity, but also the challenges that many communications fields, including journalism, still face in terms of ensuring that they represent the whole diversity of the communities that they cover. More racial diversity in journalism is critically important as we go forward, much more diversity of background. I have started to think much more deeply about geographic diversity. We now are in a country where people on the coasts and people in the middle of the country, people in rural areas and people in cities think very differently. And if I want my news organization to truly be able to reflect what is happening in this country, I need to think about diversity of upbringing, diversity of background, diversity of geography in some cases. And I think it's that complex, rich mix that is what we all need to kind of think about going forward. The other thing that I would say is that even as I realized how much actually mattered to keep making this progress, I also admit that I have become a bit frustrated by the idea that there is one way that women lead. There's not, and I'm so eager to kind of get past that in my own personal experience. I get asked sometimes, well, how are you different? How are you different? How is it different for you to lead the Washington Post than it is for your predecessor to lead the Washington Post, right? And it's a question that I understand, but I also get so frustrated by that question because I don't know if the way that I lead is actually primarily because I'm a woman, or if it is because I am a woman, but it's also because of where I was raised and what I came up through and the generational experiences that I had as I was going through my career. And I'm so eager for us to get to the point where we realize that, representation by women in leadership fields is important, not because it means one type of leadership, but because it means many potential different types of leadership. Now, obviously, there is a range of experience, maybe a certain sensitivity toward the challenges of women in leadership that I would feel much more strongly than the succession of men in the job before me. But it's also, I think, critically important that we think about what are my personal values of leadership. Some of mine are transparency and collaboration, rigor in the intellectual work that we do, but also sort of an accessibility in the journalism that we give to the world. And I don't know if those are because of the experiences that I had as I was going through journalism, how much of them are because of my gender or my background. And I think that this is a rich area for us to explore going forward. And I personally am so eager for the conversation around women in leadership to get to that complexity point, right? I think we see a little bit of that when there's conversations around like, Sheryl Sandberg or something like, well, she's I don't know, she's not as nice as she should be in that job as a woman or something like that. And I'm eager for those discussions because I think they are a richer and more complex sort of challenge for us to face that I think will be very valuable. But thinking about all of this, I'm constantly struck that the person who took over from me as the editor of the AP, who also happens to be a woman, a lot of people have said, oh my God, her leadership style is so different than yours. And that to me has been kind of a great breakthrough, right? Women also have different leadership styles. And I think that getting to the point where we have that more sophisticated conversation is almost like an indicator that we are making progress. And that really excites me. So I wanted to talk just beyond that subject a little bit about some things like trends in the media, the future of media, new types of jobs may be helpful for some of you as you're thinking about your future and your career. And these are all very general and happy to drill down on any of these in the question and answer session. But a couple of things that I would say from my own experience, very much in the mix of daily journalism. We are finding that increasingly the mix of journalism skills and also what I would call technical skills of many types is increasingly valuable to newsrooms. And I think Mindy could probably say this from her experience as an editor too. I'm really trying to push the idea that when it comes to journalism, the whole concept of girls who code and women in technical fields is
Did we lose her?
Sorry about that. Did I go away for a second?
You did.
Okay, but I'm back. Okay, good. Okay, sorry. Don't know why that happened. I mean, it's not just on the reporting side. It is also that coding skills are important to the way that we now tell stories. Okay, we do a lot more. I mean, obviously, writing is still one of the cores of journalism, but data visualizations, interactives, the mix of visual and print storytelling, all of these things are so important to the future of journalism that I am really trying to encourage that strong mix of journalistic skills and values with some real technical skill is one of the things that is increasingly, I think, a differentiator in our field going forward. If you look at some of the work that the cutting edge of people are doing right now around what we call visual forensics, visual investigations, those are just critically important things in terms of the way the excellence that journalism can carry going forward. I would also say that data skills, data analysis skills, data visualization skills, a much stronger ability to get information out of data is critical in journalism going forward. This is because this is the way the world is going. I mean, what journalism does is it follows where the world is going. And right now, technology is so critically important to almost every issue that we cover, whether that is disinformation, whether that is the global economy, that the ability to not just talk to people and get information out of people, but to be able to get information out of data, and to be able to get information out of documents, and to be able to get information out of some of the best journalism in the last year has been looking at, how TikTok, interacts with its users. And technical skills are increasingly important in that type of journalism. I would say the other thing is just the best advice I can ever give to anyone, a woman coming up in any field, especially in journalism, is to take jobs that challenge you, to take risks where you are going to learn from people, where you are going to learn new things. In my own career, sort of the breakthrough moment was when I left a relatively safe job with a relatively safe career path. I was in Washington, I was a reporter, I was moving into editing, and I decided to go to the Middle East, which was a fairly radical thing to do because I wanted the experience of working, in that case, in a conflict zone. It doesn't always have to be a conflict zone. It doesn't have to be that risky, but I wanted to challenge myself, and I wanted to get out of what I perceived was sort of a safe career path and see what I could do. And that job really taught me to stand on my own 2 feet. I was a manager. I was dealing, with war zones. I wasn't necessarily going out and dodging bullets, but I was very far from my bosses. I had to really learn a lot of autonomy. I had to learn how to make decisions on my own. I had to learn when to ask for help. All those things are just critical for leadership. And so when I talk to people about this, I say, take jobs that challenge you. Take risks where you learn. Take jobs where you learn new things. I think that is the single most important thing that a person can do on that leadership path. And I think that in journalism right now, that means, I work at a big institution. I work at a big company. At the AP, I worked at an institution. But I do actually think that there's a lot of really interesting things going on in the field of journalism at small startups also. And so I would say that right now, that kind of journalism entrepreneurship is a very interesting sort of potential career path, because it's a way that in some cases to learn things in a slightly less sort of, rigid hierarchy kind of thing. And then be confident, right? I think that the thing that I see that women leaders, as they come into the field, sometimes still struggle with ever so slightly is just being able to take their rightful place in the room, even when they are completely skilled enough to take their rightful place in the room. Everyone who comes into a new management job has to learn new things. Everyone has feelings of uncertainty. And it's just critically important that women in particular not let that hamstring them, that they know that they have a right to that place at the table, and that they feel that confidence, but that they also exhibit that confidence as they interact with their peers. I think that is something that I think is critical in any job we take. It never gets easier. It's always something that we have to work on, no matter what job you're moving into. I felt it when I took on this job. And I think it's just so important that we talk about it, because it can sometimes hamstring people, and it should not. So those are the things that I wanted to say, the things that are top of mind for me at this moment in time, and would love to take your questions and drill down into anything you want to ask, or on totally different topics.
Sally, thank you so much. You have had such an amazing career that there's a ton of takeaways. I had to laugh when you talked about, female leadership styles. My boss at the Miami Herald was the first female publisher, and every time she was asked, how does it feel to be the first woman? And she would quip, I don't know, I've never been a man. So anyway, you more elegantly address that issue, than I think which she would when she was irked. But we have the one question I will ask you, and we have a couple now coming in from the students is, journalism and communications in themselves don't really train you to be a leader. It turns out that oftentimes the best journalist, the best publicist gets promoted. So what do you wish someone had told you, before you embarked on your leadership career that you would share now with, our students?
Yeah. And that is a really good point. I fear saying, but I think it's very true that trend has not stopped, right? I mean, our field is a little slapdash. We're always busy. And so we tend to promote people who are very highly skilled, but may not, have had any training as managers, right? And so I would say the most important things are to think of leadership and managing as coaching rather than as being the boss. If there was one thing that I think is just the most critical thing, is that you're not moving into some special stratosphere. You're just moving from doing the work yourself to coaching other people to do the work. And then, there's add-ons. There's, you have to be responsible for company policies and things like that too. But those are things you can learn. The core of the job is a sense of moving from I'm doing this work by myself to I'm working in a team and trying to coach the best work I can. And I think that and that's actually what we explicitly try to teach our new managers, is that this is not some radical departure from what you've been doing. Hopefully what you have been doing is working with your teammates, working with your colleagues and trying to, help other people's work. And this is just like moving into that in a more kind of mindful way. I would say the other thing is to ask for help. I sometimes feel, I'll be explicit. When I got to the post, I think that many of our new managers felt that it was a sign of weakness if they asked for help or if they tried to learn from their peers. And we've really tried to create an atmosphere where we expect managers to go to each other and lean on each other and to ask for help, to say, I've had this tough situation. How did you deal with that? So I think asking for help, and I do know that is, there are people who will say, I've had people say, well, you think that way because you're a woman. That's, you are collaborative because you're a woman. You may not realize it, but that's why you're that way, right? And to that I say, okay, maybe, I don't know, but it still is a really effective way. In a knowledge economy, I tell people, look at what tech companies do. They have these small, nimble teams that work on a very egalitarian level and push for creativity, push for results, okay? Look at what surgeons do. Like, they're teams of people who work together as a unit. And so, I think that's what journalism should do too, because we are a knowledge economy sort of company or organization. And I personally think those leadership styles, there's great lone wolf journalists, but increasingly, if you look at where the best work in journalism is being done, it is being done collaboratively with different skill sets coming together. People who have sources, people who can tell a story visually. And so a manager needs to be able to, make a team work together effectively. That's what I would say.
I'm sorry, my menagerie is now having a back choral session, but I think that you make a really great point, because obviously in the type of journalism now with data visualization, there's no real way to do those kinds of high impact projects on your own. Here's a question from Tatiana. She says her question relates to gender, and it's a two-pronged question. Do you observe differences stylistically in either interview or just approach or writing style between men and women? And if so, what advice would you have for a young journalist who's trying to develop their unique voice?
It's a very good question. I do think that there are, so yesterday we were talking about a story that we have coming out coming out in a few days, where a young man journalist on our staff spent an enormous amount of time with one of the very young victims of a recent mass shooting. This story is coming out next week. And the sensitivity and humanity with which he approached that reporting was extraordinary. And so I don't really see, I mean, he's an extraordinarily sensitive reporter who has an amazing ability to get people to open up to them. And this is small children, this is families, right? And I don't think that I think that the capability to do that can happen in any way, right? I do think that there still are some, trends and stereotypes in journalism where people who tend to be very aggressive reporters or shout at each other on cable news or things like that, are still not, I wouldn't say primarily male, but skew that way still a little bit. There's still, we still have more male investigative reporters than we do women investigative reporters. That said, some of our best investigative reporters and some of the ones who I have the strongest, expectations of in coming years are women. And so women really are moving into, I would say, some of the most predominantly long-term male parts of journalism. Okay. Women are White House correspondents. Women, of course, are investigative reporters. Our data journalism director at the Post is a woman named Megan Hoyer, who is excellent in her field and is a woman. And she, her team is mostly men, but there's women there. So I think it's starting to happen. I would say that this is really why, the field of journalism is very varied. There are people who can do deeply sensitive interviews. There are people who can do very aggressive interviews of, very recalcitrant public officials. And in some ways, those are different skill sets. They all have commonalities. They all have, a search for facts, an analytical mind, the ability to get information from people, the ability to communicate information. But I would say, and it's interesting, when I was first coming up, I don't know, Mindy, if you had this experience, I was worried that I wasn't aggressive enough to be a journalist. This was post, All the President's Men. And I was like, boy, I don't really know if I'm going to have the guts to go knock on somebody's door at midnight by myself. Okay. But what I learned over time, and what I think is just critically important, is that the skills that you individually bring as an interviewer or a storyteller can find a place in journalism in this big varied field. And so we don't all have to be alike. Gender obviously plays across that, but I don't think it's I hope in the future it's not the most important determinant. I hope that the backgrounds and the diversity and the skills that we all bring make a newsroom richer. I will say that for me, this is a critical reason why newsrooms need to be as racially diverse as we can possibly make them, because people do literally bring their life experiences to our newsroom. And that's critically important because, where I grew up, I'm obviously white. I'm going to see the world in one way. I'm going to miss stories, right? And so you desperately need, in any intellectual work that you're doing, you need the most diverse group that you can possibly get, because that's going to mean that people are literally looking at the world in different ways, and that's going to mean that you don't miss stories, okay? And there's just, we are entirely capable and have missed stories because of lack of diversity.
Here's a question from Alexandra, who wants to know, what is your key objective when you are communicating with the public, especially in your role as a journalist?
With the public?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now I am focused on, I would say, two things. I am focused on, I guess, three things. One thing is that I would say that, my organization and me personally, and what I believe in professionally, in an era of so much, in an era when technology is giving people so much information, but so much of that information is bad information. What I am very focused on is fact-based information, okay? And then I am focused on transparency around that. Literally, that journalism is not kind of a black hole. It's not a mystery thing. We're not, that we're actually telling people how we report, that we're trying to open our newsrooms as much as possible so that people can understand how we do our work, what our standards are, and that kind of thing. And then I personally am very interested in accessibility, like providing information in a way, not that is easy, not that is dumbed down. I don't mean that, but that is accessible to people. Okay. And why do I care about that? Because I think there is a potential future universe where there's a lot of really good, serious journalism, but it's not actually in the core conversations, right? That young people, for example, are communicating on TikTok and they're talking about vaccines and there's not facts injected into that conversation, right? And so, like, I care very deeply about the rigor of the journalism we do, but then I care just as deeply that we are actually making that journalism accessible to people, okay? And by that, I mean new forms of storytelling, right? Lots of people read very long stories, but I also want to get our journalism to people who don't read long stories. And I'm seeking sort of the ways to pull people into deeper journalism through things like social media, through things like, and I think that's really one of the big challenges of journalism right now. On transparency, I constantly feel like, we talk a lot about transparency, but we actually struggle as an industry to actually make progress on it. And, we had a story this week about retired military generals who go work for foreign governments, okay? And traditionally, what our newsroom would have done is just present that story and say, this is what we found. But what we're increasingly finding is that people are actually interested in how we got that story. They're actually interested in who wrote that story, not because we want to push our personalities forward, but because they want to make sure, they kind of want to test us. Like, did you do it in a good way and that kind of thing? And so it's a challenge in my newsroom right now, but it's one of the things that we're really focused on to try to also say, here's how we did this story, right? In that case, we literally had to go to court and sue the federal government to get these records. And it's an ongoing conversation in our newsroom that, show your work. Like, the public's interested in how you do the journalism. And that is, I don't feel like I'm succeeding at this yet, but this is what we're trying to talk about day by day. Because that's another sort of power. That's actually, to me, the answer to the trust question. Like, you can't expect people to trust you blindly anymore. You have to actually tell them why they should trust what you're doing. It's really hard sometimes for journalists to do, but they should know we're good. They should know our standards. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think that challenge goes beyond the Washington Post newsroom, but I think it is really critical, especially where we're at with trust in the media right now. Show your work, and it doesn't come naturally, I think, to journalists.
No, it does
not. So I have another question this is anonymous, but it's the question is, what is the difference between opportunities that are challenging in a beneficial way versus challenging in a detrimental way? When in the thick of it, how do we tell that a challenging opportunity is beneficial for the sake of growth? I'm starting in my career and need guidance.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really, really smart question. I would say that is very hard. I would say that sometimes the difference between an opportunity or a challenge that's beneficial and a challenge that's actually going to be, not beneficial is the people you work with. Okay. And this is really hard, but I think sometimes, especially early in a career, it's important to actually think about, does the job look good? Does it sound good on a resume? Or are the people in the job supportive and, supportive and open to your growth, right? And that's what I would actually seek to do. I would seek to work with and for people who are going to challenge you, but in a positive way, and who care about your career development. Okay. I mean, you can learn valuable things from bad bosses, and we've all had bad bosses, but you learn so much valuable stuff from good bosses and from good colleagues. It's not just bosses. It's actually, I mean, look, I feel like the vast majority of what I learned in my career, I learned from my colleagues. Okay. I learned from my bosses too, but the really valuable people are the people you work with, because they're smarter than you, they're more experienced than you. And you just if they're good people and they help you learn, then you're in the right position. And so you don't want to get in a situation where people aren't interested in your growth. Okay. You want to find situations where your bosses and ideally your colleagues, where they're growing, where they're exploring, and where, that's a natural part of the team. And so that you can do that too. The other thing is, I would say competition is good, but competition can also be obviously destructive. And so you have to find the right balance of how competitive is this place? Is it going to challenge me? But it's not like a, knives out. I mean, you can learn things from that, but it's not the best. It's not the best, right? And then I think it just has to work for you personally, right? No one should burn out. No one should work so much that they are killing themselves. But it is critically important that the jobs that you take have meaning for you and that you are just really enthused about them. I would be leery of taking a job that you don't feel like a natural intellectual or emotional enthusiasm for.
You touched on this issue a little bit when you were talking earlier, but Cindy wants to know, what new jobs do you envision emerging in newsrooms because of technology?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's so many, it's hard to talk about them. Okay. So first of all, there's a lot of jobs that are, how we connect our journalism to the public and where the public is now. So everything from, social media to audience engagement. Those are critically important jobs in our newsroom. Sometimes people get in those jobs and then they're sort of but I also need to get some fundamentals of journalism, of reporting, of things like that, right? And I think that's an important kind of balance to get there. But the specific jobs that I'm talking about right now, so a couple of years ago, BuzzFeed won a Pulitzer Prize for a really amazing story where they looked at where China was building detention camps to hold Uyghur people. A terrible story, China putting people of Uyghur descent into detention camps. And one of the people on that team was a woman who had been trained as an architect. And she had moved into journalism, but she had brought what were essentially what I would call visual intelligence skills, right? In other words, visual data skills, visual investigation skills to that effort. And she was the person who thought up the central idea in the investigation, which was to look at Chinese satellite imagery to figure out where they were blurring things out, to go find those coordinates, and then to go seek out other satellite imagery that showed those coordinates. And through that, they were actually able to show, through what was in my view, groundbreaking visual forensics investigation, they were able to show that China was building what looked like detention camps in certain areas, in this far western areas of China. And then they were able to match that with reporting on the ground to verify that there had been people inside those camps and stuff like that. But I mean, an architect helped win an investigative Pulitzer Prize. What's that about, right? And to me, that is just a great example of what we're talking about. That the coding skills, that the ability to analyze large amounts of data, which takes coding skills, that someone who is basically trained as a visual investigator, those skills are in my view. Now, I'm not saying that every newsroom is going to hire that tomorrow. Okay. I mean, we need people who can write. We need people who can write fast. All those, we need people who can shoot video and edit video, right? But I think that thinking about that is, we need people who can speak different languages. But I do think that thinking about those technical skills and how they actually, journalism at its core is about gathering information, finding out what that information says, and telling a story to people. And what I foresee in journalism is that there is a massive need for people who can gather information that is buried in technology. And most of our journalists,
Right.
Don't necessarily know how to do that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have to mention that at the AP, I believe during your tenure, also won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing slavery in the fish trade, and with a real novel at that point use of satellite.
Right. We were able to track an actual shipment of goods, okay, an actual shipment of shrimp from one place to another. Because, of course, the companies in the United States always said, well, we understand it's a problem, but it's not our stuff. And we were actually able to show that there was, through a GPS tracker. I mean, it wasn't necessarily, but it just takes that kind of thinking.
Right.
It just takes understanding. Like, let me give you another example. Okay. Right now, for the government to do investigations, police agencies, federal law enforcement, or stuff like that, if they want to subpoena somebody's information, okay, like let's say it's their phone or their email or something like that, that's all in the cloud, right? It's all in the cloud. Like, to actually get that information, you have to go to tech companies and say, like, I'm a FBI investigator. I have to go to I have to go to Google, I have to go to Amazon, I have to say, like, I want this person's records, right? And that's not the way it used to be, right? And so we need people who actually understand how the world works right now. And the way the world works right now is through coding. I mean, code is the language of our world. And so journalism needs people who have those skills. Now, we also need people who can write and can storytell and stuff, but that's what I mean by what I'm saying.
Following up on that, Terry was asking, do you see, or are you even experimenting yet with virtual reality in journalism?
With what? I'm sorry?
Virtual reality.
Yeah, great question. I mean, there was sort of a little bit of flurry a couple of years ago on AR and VR as storytelling things. A lot of that has kind of gone by the wayside right now. I would say not necessarily because not necessarily. I mean, it definitely could come back, but I think we right now think that there's more immediate sort of payoff in, like, analyzing, open source video and stuff like that. I mean, where we're really finding, and I think where you see, and this could change in 3 years, obviously, but where you really see what I consider the true breakthroughs in journalism right now is in the smartest possible analysis of basically open source visual and data information. So, for example, when Jamal Khashoggi was killed, the New York Times did some amazing work where they analyzed photos and videos of who was outside the Turkish embassy. And then they were able to go back and pretty conclusively say that people who were outside the Turkish embassy and who entered the Turkish embassy were connected to people who were connected to people who were connected to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, right? And it was pretty strong, solid evidence that these were just not random people who had killed Jamal Khashoggi. They had high-level connections in the Saudi government. And that was through essentially, it was through, a version of simple facial recognition, looking at photos and saying, this guy was in this photo, he was here then, and then he was standing 3 feet away from the Crown Prince, 6 months earlier. Okay. And so we think that smart analysis of open source information right now is where the best reporting is being done. I will say that totally separately, we are trying to stay as on top of AI as we possibly can, because we are enormously worried. And I think this is no surprise to anyone. We are enormously worried about the ability to fake photo and video going forward. And so like the chain of custody of visual information is one of the things that our newsroom is. I would never say that we are, I would never say that we're like, are we on top of this? I don't know, probably not, but we are constantly thinking about that. We are constantly thinking about how do we prevent fake photos from getting into, our entire credibility is based on the idea that we're not ever going to give something fake to people. Okay. We're going to make sure that it's real before we ever, present it to anyone, whether that's a fact or whether that's a video or whether that's a photo. But we, are trying to get as many skill sets as we possibly can to ensure that we are as strong at filtering that stuff out as possible. And that is a big worry, I think, going forward for all of journalism.
Yeah, that is actually a huge, and that goes back to the credibility issue too. So Rebecca wants to know what are newsrooms doing to help journalists gain some of these key skills like coding, and is the onus on the newsrooms, or should the journalists be out trying to acquire these skills on their own?
Yeah, really great question. Ongoing debate in many newsrooms. Look, I think every company in the entire world, no matter what industry they are in, and certainly journalism newsrooms, feel that constant training of people is just, the world changes so fast that it's not like people can come out of college with one skill set and then they have 30-year careers. This is not unique to journalism. This is actually what is happening. Go listen to any, 6 months ago, I was on a panel with these big time industrial manufacturers, and they were talking about the exact same thing, right? Like it's not, you don't leave college with a skill set that propels you forward for the next 30 years. The world is changing too fast, okay? And so we are trying to up our training. We are trying to do as much training as we possibly can. Sometimes we do that in-house. Sometimes we do that, outsourcing. But it is a massive, it's sometimes we do it through hiring though too, because we are definitely looking for people who bring skill sets that are unique that we need, right? But I would say it's certainly the responsibility of news organizations. It's just, it's just an ongoing challenge to find the time, space, and money to do that. And so I think that is one of the big things. I will say that, training and basically, career development, skill building is an enormously important request, especially, of all of our staff, right? That is what they want. That is what they, in some ways, most want from us. And we are trying to be responsive to that. And we know it's critical to our own competitiveness, right? But it's hard. It's hard to do as much training as you should do. So it's just kind of an ongoing struggle, I guess I would say. Mindy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, because I think it's
I was going to ask you a little bit. I want to put our colleagues here on the spot a little bit. You have several major, universities represented here who are training, future journalists. And so what is it that, two questions, and of course you have Lillian, whose whole mission has been to train women to be leaders. So the first question for you is, what do you wish journalism schools were doing more of, so that you wouldn't have to worry about training, the journalist in some of these specific skill sets?
Right. So I would just say a couple things. First of all, I think the journalism schools do an excellent job. I think I would say it this way. First of all, being able to collect information and analyze information and then communicate information, think about the information, be analytical about the information, and then communicate it are critical. I think the most important thing is to be as agnostic as possible about how you collect and how you tell your stories, okay? Good writing is critical. It doesn't matter if you're in TV. It doesn't matter where you are. Good writing is critical. Good, clear writing is absolutely critical. It is still largely the way that the world communicates. And so that is critical. But visual storytelling is enormously important. Having a visual look at the world is critically important. And I would say, journalists have always been sort of like, obscurely proud that they're not good at numbers. Well, that's not really okay anymore because the world works on numbers. And if we're not good at numbers, we're not going to understand the world, right? And so I would say journalism schools just need to say, basic statistics, please, right? Basic legal, basic how do laws work? How does data work? Some intersections there's some universities that are offering journalism and coding intersections. I don't know how successful those are. I don't know if they're working, but I totally applaud that. But I think just, I came out of school not being able to read a balance sheet. And I don't think that's okay. I think that you really do have to have some felicity with numbers. I taught myself along the way because it was critical. I don't know how you can cover government and not be able to crunch some data. So,
and when you go into role and you have to, understand your budget so your CEO or your CFO doesn't cut more of your positions or et cetera, it becomes a real critical and not a great skill to learn on the job while you're trying to, defend your resources. So, what if I know we have just a few minutes left, so if anybody has a question, I might have room for one more, send it in. But what advice would you have, say, for Lillian, and whose mission it is to help prepare women to enter leadership roles, not just in newsrooms, but in media and communications and public relations and advertising. She's having people like you obviously speak to our younger students is fantastic, but and she has incredible programs that she puts together. This is just one of them, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts on, from your own experience, wish I had known.
I do think networking is incredibly important. And I know that is one of the things that you all focus on. And I think that is really critically important. People move, there's more fluidity, I would say, in some of these industries than there has been in the past. And I think what is the unfortunate reality is that people still fall back on people who they know. And so, I do see in our industry that, men tend to hire more men, women tend to hire more women, women of color tend to hire more women of color. And so I think they're getting people into hiring positions, getting people into jobs where they can hire and mentor, getting diverse people into jobs where they can hire and mentor is critically important. And so I think that, I know that's what you're focused on, and I would just keep focusing on that. I don't believe that we are where we would ideally end up yet.
Yeah. And then I'll kind of circle back to something you said in that comment. You said, you were you're a little disappointed in how far we have to go. And so, what is being done? You're obviously have plans in there, but what can be done to increase the representation, not just in your newsroom, but just in media,
I think we all just have the responsibility to not let up on it. I think that is really the critical thing, is that's sort of what I mean by a spectrum. Just, the major legal battles were fought in the 70s. The glass ceiling, some chunk of the glass ceilings have started to be broken. But to get one woman into a job, I would feel better if you were 15 years on and it was, half the time the people in the top jobs were women and half the time they were men. Now, it's not quite that, it's not quite that linear, right? But I think that what we need to go from is where this is still extraordinary to it is, routine, right? And I think, I'm not saying anything political here, but we still haven't had a woman president, did we notice that? Right. There are still quite a few things going on in our country, not to mention in other countries that are still not where we, ideally would end up. So I think the issue is to think about what are the issues right now? And I think right now it's replication and, continued mentoring and getting people from, I don't know, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way there to, that's what I would say, basically. Keep the pipeline going, but then think about like the top reaches of the pipeline and how you replicate at the top reaches of the pipeline. And it's just kind of a coincidence that I was succeeded at the AP by a woman.
Right.
But it's like, like when places have had 3 women top executives,
Yeah, I think
then you're starting to make progress.
I think the AP is probably a little bit ahead of the curve. And this is speaking as I was the first woman editor at the Miami Herald. So yeah, and it was 2010. So yeah, there's some more work to be done. But happily also was succeeded by a woman and a woman of color. So there's some progress there. Sally, I know you have to run to get prepared for the Pulitzer Prizes tonight. So, congratulations to your team. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been really delightful to hear from you. And I'm sure we could talk to you for another hour, but we won't put you through that. So thank you so much.
Really wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. I also see that you have Sam and other wonderful people ready to talk next. So I leave you in wonderful, wonderful hands. So
thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. So for the, thanks again to Sally for joining us. And we have we have more fabulous speakers ahead. We have 3 who I'm going to introduce, 3 amazing women that I'm going to introduce to you shortly. And just to let you know how it's going to work, I'm going to introduce each of them. They're each in turn going to give kind of a short vision, short-ish, not short, but they're going to give their vision, kind of a vision statement, and then we're going to chat, and we hope to get your questions to them. So please, put them in the chat, and we'll try to get your questions answered. So we have, first, I'm going to introduce Janet Rivera Hernandez. She's Vice President of Communications for MasterCard Latin America and the Caribbean, responsible for leading the company's internal and external communication activities, including media relations, reputation management, thought leadership and events, employee communications, and digital communications. For over a decade, Janet has spearheaded transformational communications programs for the company. Prior to joining MasterCard in 2002, Janet held several leadership roles in top global PR agencies such as Porter, Novelli, and Edelman, working on corporate and consumer accounts and international events. In 2017, she was named PR Week's Top 40 Under 40 NPR. In 2019, she was inducted into the FIU School of Journalism and Communications Hall of Fame. And in 2022, she was recognized as an unstoppable woman by Telemundo and top woman in PR by PR News. So thank you for joining us, Janet. I'm going to continue down the row and then come back to you to get us started. Also with us is a familiar face for me. Samantha Ragland is Vice President of Journalism Programs for the American Press Institute, where she leads a team with the goal of impacting the longevity of local news and leading API's efforts to promote cultural transformation and business sustainability in media, helping news organizations serve diverse readers and communities more effectively. Samantha was a former leadership faculty member at the Poynter Institute as director of the flagship Leadership Academy for Women and co-directed the Poynter Cope Media and Journalism Fellowship Program. Prior to that, she served as director of digital content strategy for Gatehouse Gannett Media's Florida Group, where she was responsible for growing digital audiences across 22 newspaper markets. And as Sally will say, she was one of the female pioneers in the space that Sally's been talking about in terms of the forefront of data crunching. An award-winning newsroom leader, she's dedicated to the reinvention of local news and serves on the University of Florida Journalism School Student Advisory Board and was selected as a digital media consultant for the Online News Association, Local Speakers Bureau, and coach for digitalwomenleaders.com. Thank you, Sam, for being with us today. And now Sandra Smester is Executive Vice President, Programming and Content Development at NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises, where she oversees the development and execution of programming and is responsible for primetime and daytime programming, content acquisitions, program planning and scheduling, and the company's cable network Universo. A longtime veteran of Spanish language media, she has more than 25 years of experience in programming Spanish language content for U.S. Hispanic audiences. Most recently, she served as Executive Vice President and Chief Content Officer at TV Azteca, where she drove the growth of the company's share in Mexico, Latin America, Europe, and the U.S. Hispanic market. Sandra has also served as Executive Vice President and General Manager of Azteca Uno and held a series of leadership positions at Univision Communications, advancing to the role of Executive Vice President of Programming. She has been recognized with an array of industry accolades, including multiple Emmy Awards. So thank you all for joining us. This is quite a lineup. As promised, Jen, I'm going to turn to you to kind of get us started.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you, Mindy, for the introduction. Just a quick thank you to Dr. Copenhaver for the work that you do for supporting women in communications and creating this incredible forum. And so I have to start by saying, go Panthers. Pause up. I'm not sure if I'm doing this right because I actually researched that there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. So I'm hoping that I'm doing this right. But seriously, I'm so excited to share a bit of my knowledge and experience with the students watching today, because I truly believe in the power that role modeling has to inspire young women and girls to see themselves in other women. And I'm joined today by some amazing role models that also inspire me. So I think the future of communications is watching. It's you. It's all of you watching today. And it's so exciting. I hope that you take some of the information we're sharing with you today and just build on that. So as Mindy shared in the introduction, my perspectives, what I'll share today will come from my experience in public relations. So I went to FIU, studied mass communications, PR, and marketing. I've worked on both the agency side and the corporate side, or in-house, which literally these days means in-house. I've been working remote for the past 3 years. And managing a team comprised of about 75% women, which we're very proud of. It's a bright light in the organization. I've spent the majority of my career in a payment technology company who partners with government and tech and financial services companies, and have witnessed the incredible impact that technology and the digital evolution has had for good and for bad across so many industries. I think we just heard Susie speaking about just the impact technology has had in media as well. And so same has happened with public relations. So it's impacted just everything, including the way we interact as humans. So my first piece of advice for communications professionals and PR students is to stay curious, stay curious and continue that learning agility, building your skill sets, and also be adaptable, because change is happening so fast with technology. Learn to do things, challenge yourself to do things in a different way. In this field, and particularly in the technology industry, this is not for those that like to stay in the comfort zone. It's not an option not to invest in learning about the new trends and technology, and understanding the globalization of reaching out to media and international nature of the work that we do, and the impact now that what we do in the US, or in my case, Latin America, has an impact internationally. So in my case, we're experiencing, my team and I, on technology, learning new things that I never imagined, not even 5 years ago, last year, that I would be working on. We hosted our first press conference in the metaverse with journalists from Latin America, creating NFTs that are backed by a cause, or using AI in social media to feed consumers branded content. I never imagined that we would be doing anything like this. So we have to learn quick. We have to be on our feet, and we have to not only depend on the companies that we work for to help train us, but also take the initiative to do this on our own. And the benefit of doing this is that you can expand the industries you work for. So crypto, for example, now with the experience that we've gained with doing NFTs, working with the metaverse, fintech, technology, multimedia. So you might just end up creating a role in the future that doesn't exist today. A chief metaverse communications officer. I don't know. That could be your role in the future. Who knows? So I had a boss that always told me that you need to identify empty spaces and occupy them before somebody else does. And really, that's what companies are looking for in a PR pro. They're looking for the PR pro to look around the corners, connect the dots, help them remember what's behind them and predict what's ahead. So my second piece of advice is to take some risks and occupy those empty spaces. Take the initiative, make that your MO, so that you are constantly contributing to the company and also evolving as a professional. I've been with MasterCard for nearly 20 years. So it's always been a challenge of mine and my team to just make sure that we're not staying stagnant, that we're not saying, well, that's the way it's always been, that we're challenging ourselves to do something else and also finding new ways to contribute to the business. We need to be, as PR professionals, very close to the business, expanding our business acumen, understanding how to measure our work, which I think has always been a challenge in our industry. And so creating programs, events that generate revenue or leads for the company. Lead generation is a really hot topic in the PR industry these days. And be patient, because it takes time and confidence to tackle new things. And I hear a lot about this imposter syndrome. I think it's true as we tackle new things and we're challenged to learn quickly. So my next advice is don't be afraid to have the F talk, failure and feedback. So failing, definitely teaches us amazing lessons that helps us build our skill set. And it's important to look for a job in a company that appreciates vulnerability and transparent feedback as a strength. And I love Brene Brown. So if you've seen her talk on vulnerability, she talks about how vulnerability should be celebrated because it means that you're courageous, you're taking a risk, which is important because you need to stop thinking about the climb up the ladder, but building bridges, right? And so that's something that if I look back at my career, I climbed up. What I would have done differently is started to, kind of zigzag, build bridges, make lateral moves, move into different roles and come back. I can always come back to comms, which is my passion. And so building bridges is really important for us women, particularly building our network, building our support team. I had my first executive coach and sponsor 5 years ago. I wish I would have had mentors and sponsors many years ago. And it was the most amazing, eye-opening experience that accelerated my growth because self-awareness is key. Understanding where you are, what are your blind spots, that feedback is what's going to help you continue to grow. And another advice that I have is one of the things that I learned through coaching and mentorship is the realization that as PR pros, we don't do enough PR for ourselves. So we don't do enough PR for our own brand. We spend a lot of time preparing other executives, getting them out there, building their brand, pushing their LinkedIn, but we don't do enough for ourselves. So investing in yourself, in your public speaking skills. A lot of us we're afraid and we teach, but we don't really like to put ourselves out there. And that is so important to invest in yourself, in your visibility, in your public speaking skills. And that was something that takes time and is a little scary, I think, for a lot of people. And just to close, my last piece of advice comes from a very reputable journalist who is unapologetically himself, Ron Burgundy, who preaches the power of authenticity. He is himself. And so my last advice is to stay classy, as Ron Burgundy says, stay yourself. Don't, make sure you grow, but you stay humble and kind of trust your gut. I think your gut's always right. Thank you. That's what I have today.
Thank you for that. That's a lot. And there's a lot of great threads that I see really overlap and I think augment what we heard from Sally and I'm sure others. So we'll come back to that hopefully in the Q&A piece of this. And now Sam Ragland.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mindy. Thanks, Janet. Janet, I took so many notes as you were talking. I always feel so happy to do these kinds of things virtually because it gives me a chance to take my own notes versus doing it in person. And I'm like, oh, that was such a good line. I should write that down.
I took a bunch of notes from Sally too.
So I love that. I'm just going to pick up on some threads that you talked about as I was getting my thoughts together. I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm happy to be able to see the participants list because I see some folks who I love and adore in the room, which is awesome. So, I was thinking about what to share with you all. And I thought, what's the best piece of advice, right, that I've gotten as a journalist? And Janet actually just mentioned it. She talked about building bridges, which I love. The piece of advice that I got was actually that you should look at your career like a jungle gym and not a ladder. And when I got that piece of advice, I was like, wait a minute, you mean I don't have to just go up? I can go over and to the side, and I could even strategically go down before I go up, right? And it was such an empowering lesson, I think, for me to learn. It's one of the number one things that I share when I'm in spaces like this. I'll be fully transparent, though. I have a degree in poetry and creative writing. So this is where I started. And then I did dropout prevention for at-risk high school students. I never thought that I would make it into media, even though I have a master's in the stuff, right? I just didn't think I would land here. And I think that's also really important when I speak with early career folks, when I speak with folks in school, knowing they might want to step into this. One of the things that I'm often hearing is how nervous they are and what if their path doesn't line up with what they are used to hearing or what is most traditional. I did not take a traditional path to get here, and it took me almost 6 years after my graduate degree to land in a breaking news web producer position here at the Palm Beach Post. I did not even have a Twitter at the time. Don't tell them. I started one right before my job interview. And so I was not prepared to be online at 5 a.m. while I was actually still teaching a full course load at a small business college here in South Florida. That was almost 10 years ago, which I'm terrified to admit to all of you faces that I can't actually see, but it was about 10 years ago. So time flies. And every year after that, there was a promotion. There was a new position. There was a new challenge every year that I was on staff at the Post. So much so that I quickly became the youngest manager in the newsroom. And I was the only woman of color in management for a short while there. And I believe that I did not grow at that pace. I believe my career did not accelerate at that pace because I was standing around and waiting for someone to get off the ladder. I was just wait, do you mean I can actually bypass them? You're on the ladder, hang out there, do what you have to do. Let's figure out how I can create the next role so that you are no longer in my way. That became a real strategic part of my career development and a part of the work that I did. It is very easy to do that when you're on the digital side of a newsroom because you're creating everything as you go. Every position that I had were words that existed but hadn't quite been put together in a job description yet. And then they were. So to Janet's point, you probably don't even know the job you're going to have one day because it doesn't yet exist. You will be the person that helps it to exist. And so I would encourage all of you to respect the hierarchy to a point, but do not allow the hierarchy to hold you down and kind of delay your growth because there is opportunity to go around the hierarchy and look at your career, like I said, as a jungle gym instead of as a ladder. This is especially true, I have found, in the way you communicate with your work. And you can start now with your professors versus your colleagues and your peers. I found it really important to understand language and to understand the difference between communicating kind of horizontally with my colleagues versus vertically with my managers. And as I grew in my leadership career and had a team of my own, I learned very, very quickly how important it was that I didn't just manage them, but that they actually managed me. One of the most delightful gifts I was ever given by a reporter of mine actually was, hey, we just hired so-and-so. Do you want me to take them out to lunch and teach them how to manage you? And I was like, yeah, here's my company card. Go teach them everything that I literally need in order for this relationship to be successful, right? Those types of things are not in your job description. It is very much, though, a part of your job to figure out your manager, to figure out the leaders in your newsroom or in your shop, help make their job easier while you're kind of propelling and taking your steps forward or sideways. I would encourage you to think creatively about the way you take on and manage your career. You know, I'm constantly asked how you know when it's time to make the move, right? Having left higher education for journalism, having left journalism for adjacent leadership work at the Poynter Institute and now at API. And I often share with people how important it is to have like a deep sense of peace in the moves that you're making. I never made a move that I was anxious about. There was always peace, and there was always kind of like this clear set of facts. And those facts I found were based on two things: the impact that I wanted to have in the industry and the challenges that I was ready to take on. Like, there becomes the point when you will outgrow a position. And you'll be really lucky if you land with a manager who wants you to outgrow them, right? Like, I want to coach you out of needing me so that you were constantly on a path to growth. And this is fantastic. And it's also terrifying, right? This means that you will say no to promotions. You will decline higher paying gigs. You will make all of these decisions that the world might tell you, you're insane. Why would you do that? And forget the world, your family, right? Like, I'll never forget leaving the Post and thinking, or like leaving education and going to news. And my dad was like, are you sure you should do this? Right? You know, I'm a person of color. Right. And like, I come from a culture of, you better be grateful you have a job. Do not rock the boat. Right. And this is true very much for a lot of people and people groups across the country. And yet I made a choice to risk it all for myself multiple times so that I was accelerating at a rate that I was happy with, but also so that I was never growing just wide on lots of things, but I was able to take an opportunity to get really deep in some of the work that I was doing. And that really helped, right? Like, deciding that you want to take risks for yourself is one of the best decisions that you can make. And it's also one of the decisions that is least likely, I think, to be shared with most of the people in the room, right? That you should always bet on you, and that you should always be thinking about who's pouring into you, who's advocating for you behind closed doors, and how is that helping you to grow in your career and kind of treat your career as this series of ups and downs and laterals. I found that by doing that, the stars always aligned, even when I least expected it to, right? Like, I remember going into the Palm Beach Post and saying, I'm going to leave the Palm Beach Post one day and go back to the classroom because I was put on this earth to be a teacher. As a result of that, right? Like, my bosses were like, we can't lose her. Like, send her to University of Miami. She can guest teach here and she can do that. And I was always kind of scratching this itch to do this type of giving work, right? I didn't realize that an offer from like the Poynter Institute would come right before the pandemic. That would allow me to blend my love of teaching and my love and passion. That's Siri, who's, for some reason, she heard her name, but I was surprised that the stars aligned, right? And it would have been a lot harder for them to do that if I wasn't cross-disciplinary in my interest, right? That you can do comms and you can do digital strategy and you can do reporting and storytelling and teaching and find that as your career grows, we're all kind of having this like Slumdog Millionaire moment, right? Where you land at this place that is the most beautiful collision of like all of these lives that you've lived. And of course, it's harder for me to say this to you if I was like 22, right? But like all of a sudden I'm tongue-kissing 40 and I'm like, yo, like things align. Just be patient, take some risks, and you will find that it is well worth it. I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you all about leadership here in just a little bit. Thank you, Mindy.
It's just so much amazing information. You guys are like so quotable. I'm also taking a lot of notes myself here. And now we have another amazing woman to give us her thoughts, and that's Sandra.
Hi, everybody. How you doing? Oh my God, I'm so honored to be here. And Sam, the stars always align when you ask the universe, what's really in your heart. The universe always get you what you want when you're focused. So I'm a 96 FIU graduate, FIU Broadcasting Management. As soon as I finished FIU, I went and I had an internship at Univision, the Hispanic network. And I was always very, very focused. If three things that I can tell everybody here is, focus, listen, and be fearless. As a lady, and I was very lucky that when I was doing my internship, I had a great boss, a great mentor, and I'm still learning from him. I was still in communications 27 years later. And, always listening. I work and we work in a world of gentlemen. It happens to me, and I'm sure all of you that you're in a meeting and probably you're the only lady with 20-something men, so that I took as an opportunity to stand out. I said, be prepared. Be ready. Always know what the meeting is all about, and that's going to give you a chance to stand out because you're the only girl in the room. So, and another thing that I learned from what I do is a lot of people see, television is glamour, is all these things, but no, I have always seen it as a service to our community, especially our Hispanic community in the U.S. that we need so much information, comfort, because we come to this country and we leave families behind, and traditions and so many other things that television, the Hispanic networks, that's what we need to do. We need to bring those traditions to the families, to the Hispanics that are here. We're here to entertain. We're here to inform. Also, don't be afraid of change. You guys said it already. Change is a constant on this business. No one day has been the same as any other day in 27 years that I have in the business. Don't stop learning. Do not stop learning. Read now with social media, now with the internet. We have so much that we can learn. Just make sure that the facts are right. Like, we were saying, evolve, always evolve, always, think, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? How can this game be fun? And always play the game. I always said, play the game. If you're ready to play the game, it doesn't matter if it's hard. It doesn't matter if it's, rough. If you don't want to play it, get out. Don't be on the bench. Don't be a bench player. Always play the game, and when it gets harder is when it gets better, and let's do that. So those are the the things that I want to say. Most of the things you guys already say it, curiosity, be curious, like I said, diversity. We speak to not only the Mexicans, the Dominicans, the Central Americans. So we're diverse. We have to be able to do that. And also, there's a lot of the US English speaking that watch the network, and we have to make sure that we grab everybody. We're diverse. We want to reach. Now we have the opportunity to reach a lot more people and to impact more people, because, they're saying, television, people are not watching television. So we're saying, well, yeah, probably not on the screen, but content is key. It will always be key on everything that we do. So now we have the opportunity that they, take our content with them on the phone, on the train. I was just in a train from Cannes to Paris, and the lady next to me, she was watching the news on her phone. So it's like, we're accessible, we're impacting, we're reaching a lot more people. So that's what I want to say.
There's a lot of wisdom in this group already, so very impressive. And I'm going to pick up on a couple of threads in a minute, but I wanted to start with a question from Miranda for each of you, which is, how important is it to have an inclusive agenda and being diverse voices to your field? So from your perspectives in your individual fields, I don't know if you want to start, Janet.
I mean, it's incredibly important. I work for the Latin America and Caribbean region, so we are by default an incredibly diverse group, but we also have folks that I collaborate with every day that are from other parts of the world, and the perspectives that they bring and kind of just enriches the work that we do. If you are always connected with people that sound like you and talk like you and think like you, nothing is good. Nothing new is going to come out, right? So they challenge you to really, think differently and push yourself. So I think that it's having diverse teams is incredibly important. I have, as I mentioned, my team is predominantly women, but there are about 4 or 5 different nationalities in my team. I have members of the LGBTQ community in my team. So it is, always challenging ourselves and teaching each other, right? New things and how they see the world, which is also fascinating.
Sandra?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important to be represented. Television used to be, one image, one color on the screen. Now you don't see that. You don't see that, and that's beautiful. That everybody gets to be represented, and because that's who we are, and we're living in a global society now. It's like, I think borders, they're there because I guess they need to be. But if you go around the world, you see that we are all the same, and our job is to represent and to, every single one of us. In my case, on the screen and on the content that we produce. No, now it's not just looking for the perfect 20-something years ago. No, the perfect beautiful girl, the princess. Now it's like everybody gets represented, and color is beautiful. And being part of this change and in the industry, to me is amazing. That I can take that and show that to my son and to the people that I work with, So diversity is a must.
Yeah, I love that. I agree with all of this. I would add that I've been really committed and interested in cognitive diversity lately, especially as I was building out my team. You guys are, familiar clearly with South Florida. And so, that South Florida is full of transplants, I myself included. I am born and raised in Kentucky. And so when I hired a Palm Beach County local to my digital storytelling team, that was like a diversity stat for us, because we had so few people who were born and raised in Palm Beach County actually represented in our newsroom, right? And so he had a certain set of lived experiences and community connections that we would not have had without him and his voice. And so for me, I'm thinking too about the diversity that we can't see, especially because the audiences that we're serving, the internet is a world of niche audiences, right? And so as much as Black audiences and Brown audiences, these are so important. They are incredibly marginalized. They are being parachuted on all the time by local news organizations, especially and national. there's this other side of that coin, right? Like, who is the audience and how are we representing them both in our newsroom and then in our coverage? It's really hard if you don't have those voices in your newsroom. I'm actually a biracial Southern woman who picked up and moved her entire life. That gives me a certain set of lived experiences that add nuance to the stories, and it even adds nuance to the way that I would edit and give feedback, right? And so I'm looking for what else is up here. I say this especially because clearly I'm an extrovert. I get a lot of energy from people. It was really important for me to hire and to think about introverts and the energy that people who need to think first before they speak brought to my team. How am I holding space for them in a way that is empowering them and ensuring that what they think is a part of the conversation, right? We talk a lot about seats at the table, but if you aren't making space for the voices who are in those seats, then like your job's not quite done yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the definition of diversity has expanded, because you heard Sally talk about geographic diversity, and quite frankly, it was something that, when I was on the Pulitzer board, we thought about a lot too, because you don't really get a full representation if it's just, big city, big city perspectives, or, class is another big, I think issue or perspective that sometimes is missing. Following up, Sylvia wants to ask each of you what qualities you feel are important to move into leadership positions in your field. And I think that's a good, it's almost like hey, what do you wish somebody had told you, that you knew before you moved into leadership in your different roles. Sandra, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think, is you need to build relationships, but you also need to remember that the office is not a family, because, we get involved in this family thing in the office, but you have to build relationships. Always make sure that you have a mentor that is going to guide you through your career, and you have that partnership, with you. You need to learn to accept to be criticized, especially nowadays with, the social media and everything that everybody has a voice, I think at the very beginning of your career, don't chase money, in your early years, because that might take you to the wrong career in the long run. So money should not be an issue when you're starting. Make sure that is what you want and you stay focused. The job that you have is only perfect as like you make it, and play your own game. I said it before. Make sure that you play your game. Make sure to stay positive. Say yes. That's gonna, your friends and your colleagues are going to like that, but also know where the boundary is, and where you draw the line, and then you put your foot down if you feel that you're not being treated fair. Don't expect to be praised. A lot of, especially now, the young, they like to be told, oh, you did a perfect job. It's like there's a job, you have to do it. If you did it right, they're not going to tell you that you did it right. If you did it wrong, oh yeah, they're going to tell you so. But don't expect that every time that you do something, it's like, how did I do it? It's like, no, don't expect to be praised. Know your team, and who you hire and who you're working with, and every single one of their, abilities, and don't stop learning, and always stay connected with women. We need to stay connected, and we need to stay together. That will be my advice.
Yeah, I love that. I would add, Sandra is so right. Like I wish feedback is so important, right? Mm-hmm. And feedback is like this, it's a two-sided coin, and newsrooms typically will give you corrective or constructive feedback, they will rarely give you the other side of the coin, which is praise. And so this was fine for boomers. It was fine for Gen Zers. It like started to hurt our feelings as millennials, and Gen Zers. It's like, oh my God, are you serious? Right. And so what exactly is it that you're going to do about that? Right. Like what you're going to do, what I hope that people that I hire do is know how to ask for feedback, because when you are really specific in your request, you are going to get both corrective feedback or constructive feedback, but you will also get praise, right? Like, what would you have done differently in this story? I noticed that you had very little edits in this story or in this reel or whatever the case is. What did you like best about it, right? How did the pacing work for you? Oh, the pace. So being a strong communicator, to answer Mindy's question, is probably where I'm going with this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it is hard to be a strong communicator when you are digitally native and this is the world in which you speak. And yet work is very much like in real time, in person, and there are these actual connections. And so how are you communicating with me as your manager? How are you communicating across your team that is collaborative, that is effective and impactful? How are you communicating your needs, right? Like, nobody is a mind reader. How are you taking advantage of time? What things are you going to fight for when it comes to your stories and your reporting, and what things are you going to be okay to let go of, right? Like, thinking about how you're communicating across the newsroom is it's a skill. And it's a skill in person, it's a skill over the phone, and it is certainly a skill in Slack and Teams. And I would encourage all of you to think about strategic communication and how you're using that to grow in your career.
I took a lot of notes. I love everything, and I agree with everything that was said. Patience. I think when we a lot of young professionals, they want to climb up fast, they want to move quickly, they want the praise, and I think patience, communication skills, the ability to write and convey your thoughts. Now more than ever, we're communicating through text, and and trying to persuade people through our sharing our thoughts, articulating our thoughts simply. And so I'm very thankful for the Grammar Slammer, if it still exists at FIU. Because really a lot of my team members that are from FIU are fantastic writers, because they went through that rigorous training at FIU. And so, but that is really important to be able to convey your thoughts. I think Sally had mentioned financial acumen, really important. We push that aside. We're like, we're communicators. We kind of don't need that. But to manage teams, to manage a department, you need to understand, to talk to the business teams, to articulate the impact that you're having on the company. You need to do that. And I think in this polarizing time that we're living, I think emotional intelligence is incredibly important. Having empathy, understanding when is the right time to communicate, and who you're talking to, and how your communication or ideas are reaching the other person, or how they're being received. I think it's really important, especially if you're representing brands in a moment where everything we say is scrutinized, right? So the tone of the message and understanding that's having that awareness is important, and understanding that globalization, I think, as Sandra mentioned, I work in Latin America, but Brazil is a market that is seen all over the world. And anything that happens in Brazil or Mexico often gets picked up in the US or vice versa, or Europe. So a crisis doesn't get contained in one country anymore. It expands borders. So understanding international relations is important.
Wow. Yeah.
You mentioned the financial acumen, which I absolutely agree. I felt like when I first got the editor's job, somebody forgot to give me the mini MBA course that I needed to just understand the budget, and so I can't really, and we heard how that's really data skills, et cetera. But speaking of skills, we talked, I think, a good bit about, and Sam still feels to jump in, but we did talk a good bit about new skills that are necessary in journalism. But what about in broadcasting or in public relations and marketing? What are the skills that you would say, like when you're looking to hire, that you wish either you had before you had to seek it out yourself, or that you wish the folks that you're bringing onto your team had or will need?
Yeah, and I mentioned business financial acumen. really important. Understanding the trends in technology and staying up to speed, and I don't know, taking a certification course on crypto or digital currencies, understanding Web3. These are all things that are happening, whether you're interested in them or not. You're going to be a part of conversations. You want to be able to contribute, to have some knowledge. Kind of the global mindset, I think, is another one. We get very focused on the industry. We started with an agency, and the agency is U.S. focused, and in the pharma industry, we stay tunnel vision there, and so we need to think broader, think internationally. Let me see. I think those are the main ones. Just data. Measurement. I've mentioned measurement a couple of times because I think as PR professionals, we've struggled sometimes to talk about how our work, it drives reputation or helps a company with a reputation. But how do you make that tangible for a CEO to understand? So understanding data and how to evolve the way we measure, because what I get asked every day, we have quarterly business reviews, is what are we meeting our KPIs? What is our share of voice coverage versus the competition? What is our engagement rate and in social? And those are things that we need to understand and learn in terms of understanding data.
And honestly, Janet, that is the exact same thing in the newsroom, right? So for those of you who were like, I just want to report and leave me alone, that's just not the world that you're reporting in anymore. You need to understand audience engagement data. You need to be able to go beyond the top of the funnel and understand how you're contributing to loyalty views and how those views are turning into digital starts or digital subscriptions. And now beyond even that, right, which is like audience reach, there's this whole idea of community engagement, right? Taking an audience conversation one way and creating a community conversation, which is a multi-directional conversation for the community that you're reporting on and serving. And what are the impact metrics behind that? You don't want to do this, but if you want to continue to report, having a fluency in data and analytics is important to the job.
Yeah, I agree. Data. Very important in everything that we do in communications, and also learning to use the new technology, the new gadgets that are out there. It used to be that we used to go out with a huge camera, and now we don't need that. So, but
you're right.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we know the editing. A writer knows, how to direct, how to edit, and it will be a lot more, rounded, professional, and make us agile and stronger. So technology and data.
And sorry, and Sandra, to that point, and the question for you and for Sam, keep me honest here, but the press release for the PR professionals is dying. And so we need to think about new ways and to communicate, and how brands can become publishers as well. Because many years ago, I never thought about paying or doing a co-creation paid editorial. That was like, oh no, PR is purist. It's earned media only. We pitch and we get, and now with shrinking newsrooms, it's a whole new world, and we can co-create with a lot of news with networks. And so I don't know if that's what you're seeing. Keep me honest here, Sam and Sandra, is that, the press release, it's dying. We need to think of new ways to engage journalists.
Oh yeah. I mean, journalists have too much information already, right? So in the same way that we are all over inundated with information, add to that the fact that your inbox is like loaded with pitches, right? And so like building relationships is important. Relationships are typically built in person. And so what does that look like? And then what does like co-collaborating look like? For me, we worked with our food critic, for example, to do some co-collaborative happy hours around town that featured new menus, right? But all of that was happening like on the marketing and PR side of our newsroom. And it was like a public event, like for my critic, right? To like show up as the face of the coverage. But it very much happened because we were communicating for the benefit of both brands, to your point.
Yeah, the PR has become a lot more visual. We just did a huge PR campaign, and everything was like on site, taking the person, the actress to New York, to LA, getting to talk to the audience instead of just, the press release that we were used to, no?
It's much more experiential, I find.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as an editor at the Miami Herald, I used to tell a lot of the PR folks, look, before you go and like spend hours on it, just call me or shoot me a quick email and just tell me like the nugget of your idea. And then we'll spur each other pain. And if it's great, we're going to proceed. And if not, you have not spent 3 hours on something that I'm going to not look at. So, but yeah, it's really every facet of communication is clearly being really changed by technology. I wanted to come back to something that each of you mentioned. I love that each of you had a different way of capturing this, each fabulous, but it's the same idea. So, Janet, you talked about occupy empty spaces, and Sam, you talked about the jungle gym, not the ladder. And Sandra said, get off the bench, and get in the game. But what you're all talking about is creating your own opportunities. Sometimes easier said than done, right? Especially if we add in the kind of imposter syndrome thing that so often, I hate to say, is a mostly female manifested, it seems, issue. So can you each talk a little bit about more of that and what that really looks like, and like what should the folks who are listening to you take away from how to implement it in their own careers?
Yeah. In my case, as an example, I often hear my team say, well, why is that being done that way? Why isn't anybody taking that? Why isn't anybody doing anything? And I'm like, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you raise your hand and do it? If there's a problem to be solved and no one's solving it, what's the worst that can happen, right? Well, I have a lot of work. Well, your manager can make space for you to learn and take on new things. A good manager will do that for you. Mm-hmm. And so it's identifying needs that the organization hasn't met yet. And if you have the skill sets to tackle that, why not? In my case, as a practical example, we have been on this journey of, making sure people understand that we're not a credit card company. We're a technology company in the payment space. And going to what we were just talking about, experiential, we wanted to make sure that our customers were seeing that innovation in a tangible way. And so we created a conference that's now in its 11th year, and it's the only conference in MasterCard in the world that we actually generate revenue from the customers attending. And not only are we're generating leads for the company, we're generating revenue, but we're also working on positioning. And so that was an unmet need and a part of a positioning that we needed to do. No one was doing it. The sales team wasn't doing it. And somebody from the team that had the event skill set decided to just tackle it. So that's what I mean by occupying spaces.
Yeah, my case is really similar, Janet, in that, there were gaps in the way we were communicating to our audiences. And while I was on the social desk, I started doing a lot of innovation and creating best practices around vertical storytelling and Snapchat, which of course is kind of absorbed by Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. What it turned into was a really great conversation with my manager at the time, who was like, we really need to separate you out. Let's create a job for you. Like, let's create your next role, which as a woman of color in media is like a gift, right? Like, how often are we told that? And I've been told that 3 times in my career, which is delightful. But it was because I was finding needs, and I was really careful about how much I was in pursuit of those needs while maintaining the current work, right? Like, you cannot just drop your job description because you want to pursue this other thing. Right. And so it was really important for me to find a way to maintain the status quo of some of my work because it wasn't going to change while I was kind of innovating on the other side. Leadership, of course, took notice, right? And so for me, it's like, you don't have to be in a formal position of leadership and power in your space in order for you to lead. And if you start by leading yourself, it will translate into other people following. And from there, you find that it's really easy, I think, to kind of grow in your career and be given opportunities and space to do the things that you want.
Yeah. In my case, when I started, I knew that the game that I was playing, it was hard. So I will put extra time to learn and to make sure that I was learning the right things. And I was always playing. And then I knew, it was hard. I had to play, and it will get better because when you win is a team winning, and it happened like about 6-7 years ago. And, it was a new management leadership and they put a vision out there. And I said, no, I don't agree with the vision. It's fine. You guys can go ahead and do it. This is not my company. And, I'm going to sit here in the bench and, let's talk about when I need you guys are going to let me go, because I'm not going to play for you, because I don't believe on what you guys are doing. And it was something that, is in you when you know that what you're doing is right and you know that what you're doing is wrong. So since I knew I couldn't change it because it was a brand new leadership, and I said, just talk about it and see how we can finish this. But I don't want to be in your team. I want out and I'm not going to play. So it's basically, you play for things that you're passionate about. And do you believe that you're doing something right? And you just sit on the bench when it happens to me once only in 27 years. So I'm glad, but it's that knowing who you are and knowing what you're here to do and that what you're doing is right for you because you believe on what you're doing, so always that you have that in mind, always play in the team and make sure that you're one of the best players in the team. And you're not going to let that ball drop anywhere, and you're going to catch it. Even if it's not your problem, you're going to be there to catch it and all that. So that's being a good player. And if you don't want to, be part of it, just sit down and, go. Or if you're just sitting down, somebody is going to let you go because, you have to be active in the game,
So I don't know which one of you would want to answer this, but Karina was asking, what does being innovative mean to you specifically to someone who's in communications or who's a communicator?
I'm sorry, Mindy, can you repeat that?
Yeah, she wants to know, what does being innovative mean to you specifically for someone who is a communicator? What does it mean to be innovative?
Really, it's just experimenting with new ways to tell your story. Things that have been, this year I mentioned press conference in the metaverse. It hadn't been done. We didn't do it. Sometimes it's innovation within our own. Maybe it had been done before, in the world, but we had not tested it and we had not done it. And so it's really just testing new formats and again, not being afraid to fail, having feedback sessions and debriefs and postmortems to understand why it failed or, how we can do it different. But just because it failed once doesn't mean you have to give up on it. You could keep iterating it until you get it right. So it's testing with technology formats, using the skills that you have and enhance it with, complement and enhance it with other tools, channels, technology, etc.
I love that. I just wanted to add, because I want to make sure that they get what you said, Janet, because I think this is what I teach all the time, which is that, we have this like grand idea of innovation because thanks Steve Jobs and the iPhone, right? But depending on where you are, depending on the resources at your disposal in your organization across your department, innovation is going to look different for you, right? So if you were in a small 10-person newsroom and you innovate in a way to turn a regularly featured Sunday column into like an IGTV episode every week, plenty of people are doing IGTV, but that is still innovative, right? Because you haven't had the resources, you haven't had the commitment now, but that's the thing that you decided to do. And so I would just encourage you all to think with curiosity about the ways that you can do things differently. Because if it is new for your organization, that is innovative, right?
Yeah, I just add, always find that wow moment, the wow moment in everything that you do, that whatever you're doing, producing, writing, you see it, that is not going to be in the clutter, and the highlight. We're always looking, when we work on communications, we're looking for a great highlight. No, now more than ever, because there's so much content out there, that you need to have a great highlight so people will click, look, come, or do whatever they need to do to grab your content.
Yeah, sometimes we think about innovation that has to be this shiny object and, new ad campaign or marketing PR campaign. It could be solving a problem operational for your organization. Yeah, using the information that you have to solve a need. So it doesn't have to be like the shiny kind of new toy.
No, innovation is all about novel solutions, right? And like, for example, I was working with one of my fellows, and her innovation project was all about making sure that news tips that hit the inbox didn't go unanswered, because nobody wants to say, I got it, right? And so she was able to create like a form that was connected to Airtable, and depending on the language within the form that was used, then it would ping a reporter, and then the reporter would get a custom delivery of the news tip because it's on their beat. Now, this was a reporter in the newsroom who just saw a problem that was plaguing everyone, and she created an innovative solution to solve it, right? And the entire newsroom, as you can tell, you can guess, is probably super happy about it.
That's amazing. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I just want to say, somebody asked me about publishing a book, and since we have a minute left, I have to say I probably don't have enough time to answer that. The short answer is you'd want to get an agent, and then it's a multi-step process. I have a one-page kind of a one-pager that I send fellow colleagues who ask me about publishing a book, and I will share that with Lillian Abreu. And so whoever, Celia, if you want that, I will get it to Lillian, who can get it to you. And I'd be happy to talk to you offline about it, because it's kind of like a long process as I'm learning. So, this, I have to say that, I wish when I was sitting, in my, early career, that I had the inspiration from these three remarkable women, and their wisdom and Sally. So I really appreciate each of you so much sharing your just terrific insights. And thank you to Dr. Copenhaver and to Lillian for convening all of us to have this really wonderful chat. And thank you all for joining us and spending part of your day. And more to come from Dr. Copenhaver soon.